Hello, everybody, and welcome to day 3 of the Open Future Forum. For those of you who've been on the long journey with us, it has been an incredibly rich day of a global community that's gone both deep and wide. Some people have just joined for a session or two. Some of you have been here the whole time. You're on your way to that gold star I promised at the beginning of the forum. But it's been incredible. It's been more meaningful than I even expected, and definitely inspiring and powerful, and really spanned the depth of 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 the soul and the human experience and our relationship with the living world, and like so much depth of meaning making, but also so much practicality, so much of the structure and the infrastructure and the doing and the project work and the incredible interventions and the strategies and solutions. And to be of a container that's that rich is just it's actually really transformative to me as a person, to be honored enough to hold this space with all of you and how you've stepped in. And Katie and I were very clear about the intent of the forum being an emergent space, that we wanted, our aim was to hold a really good container and do our best to be savvy with holding a container that allowed for the emergence to flow. And all of you have beautifully stepped inside of that container. And so we want to thank you for joining us throughout the week, and certainly for this particular session. Again, those of you just joining, welcome. And the rest of you, thanks for being on the ride with us. Before we kick off today's session, I just want to thank in particular convening partners, and recognize that this effort has been with and through our partnerships, and that's everything that the Open Future Coalition is in service to, is all these rich partnerships. So I do want to thank the American Sustainable Business Network. I want to thank Bluefin Investment. I want to thank the Ecorestoration Alliance, who's been particularly helping us host today, the El Puente Global Unity, the Guild of Future Architects, who's been part of our morning kickoff each day, Heartland P5, Imagine World, Institute of Ecotechnics, the Intergen family, thank you for the last session you just co-hosted with us, Kinship Earth, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. I want to thank Partnerships for Change and Pro-Social World, Reconsider, Toxic Free Future for Our Children, Triangle Foundation, and United Refuge. And I want to thank so many of you who are partners with us on this journey. Even if we didn't have you as a co-convening partner, you're here with us, and it's just, yeah, I'm humbled, and be honest about that. It's been an incredible week. With that, I'm particularly excited about this session. This felt essential as we're moving around between the verticals of action in civic infrastructure and regen ag and food systems and hunger and nutrition, and now today's theme around eco-restoration and climate, and then also these weaving layers in between, talking about governance, talking about interdevelopment, talking about finance and funding and technology. And this particular session is focusing on media and storytelling, these functions between these sort of areas of action and change that require, I think, our best harnessing at this moment to understand how we can take the story, which is sometimes data and sometimes personal narrative, and what story means and what it is and what it does and what the narratives are right now that will awaken a global citizenry, help create more understanding, help shift worldviews to hopefully compel the change that's required, that can't come without a change in consciousness. So we can talk all day about engagement and action, but until we have a shift in our hearts, a shift in the worldview, a shift in our cultures and our societies, change doesn't come from external forces, it comes from within. So for me, the journey of storytelling as a fundamental, original expression of what it means to be human. Storytelling is so fundamental to what it is to be human, to meaning make our experience of consciousness and being alive on a planet and our relationships with each other. And then everything that has birthed from story is the original context for, I think, human consciousness. It's so powerful how we are defined by our stories and the narratives that we tell and that we believe in and that we inherit and that we give to the future generations. And yet, so much of our storytelling in this modern context has been corrupt. In this more westernized vantage point, stories have been weaponized to create divisiveness and war, and to create change and divide, to create oppression, to create strata of those who have and are valuable and worthy and those who don't and aren't. Story is, I think, one of the most powerful tools we have at this time. And it's the very core and essence of who we are. So I had a lot of passion for this particular session because I think that having a conversation together with those who make stories and those who amplify stories and those who are looking to leverage story to figure out how we compel the change that's needed, I wanted to weave you all into a bit of a cauldron here together to explore the real challenges to converting, a story into engagement. And I wanted to talk about where the barriers are to being more collaborative and cooperative and sort of coordinated to mobilize our stories to compel change and to reach as many people as we can, and talk about what some of those challenges are to the access to story and to people's voices who aren't being heard, and how do we amplify those voices. But I also want to talk about what is working well. I want to talk about what is being effective. How are you seeing the work that you are all doing as storytellers really impact change, and what are strategies that we could even be even more thoughtful about to take story and data and really mobilize to affect the kind of change that we need. There's many of you in the room who are actively working on large scale campaigns to reach billions of people. So building the bridges between those who have story that trying to amplify and those who are amplifying stories, trying to draw people back to action and to direct involvement in what's happening on the ground. There's a lot here to weave. And with that, I'm going to hand this in a minute here to Jake Kelley, who's one of our partners in Our Planet, Our Future, and a few other initiatives here. But one thing I wanted to do is also say that for us, this is not a theoretical conversation. It is an action moment, something that we're actively working to help promote. Let's see if you guys can see this link here. I still have my waiting room open. So I'm going to share a mural board that I don't expect anybody here to have to follow along with. Jake and I are actually going to take notes as we ask some of the panelists we've invited to the space to share your thoughts today. And it's as interactive as you'd like it to be. We do welcome you, but I don't want to distract with the mural from having a rich conversation. We just want to gather as much information as we can, because for us, this is an ongoing series that we're going to be hosting to try to build some momentum together and some partnerships. So this board is sort of a beginning place of some resources, some context, and also we're going to gather your insights here. And then it's an invitation to continue this dialogue through a cohort of 4 different sessions to continue really getting strategic about traction hacking, how we can leverage story and media and really affect the kind of change that's really required right now and mobilize as many people as we can. So with that, I am going to hand it to Jake to kind of give some additional context, and then I want to introduce the panelists that we've invited to today's session. But Jake, please take it away.
Thank you everyone for coming here. I appreciate all your contributions and attendance. I come from a family of media where my parents met at the first Fox News TV station. And so I've grown up around media. I've grown up around a country that's gone through a lot of trauma, divisiveness, and individualism. And I believe that in order to overcome our problems globally, we need to understand what's gone wrong in the past in order to look into the future on what really can go well, so we can diminish the loneliness and trauma, which is really making our ability to not listen to each other deeply, to not have truth between one another, and love and honesty is what is holding us back. So in order to help us have a little bit of a historic context, as I love history, is that a lot of the ways in which the world has changed rapidly comes from how we share and absorb information, because it changes us. How those mediums through which we communicate, like TV, social media, print news, they shape us even more deeply than the content we absorb from them. So, 2000 years ago, it was written text, and then it was the Gutenberg printing press. And after that, you saw wars proliferate around Europe for hundreds of years. The radio caused the rise of fascism. TV really led to divisive politics with Reagan and Thatcher, and embracing neoliberalism. So the ways in which we absorb news and information can really cause a lot of chaos and uncertainty. But within each one of those cycles of history that I just mentioned, there tends to be a rising force of people, institutions, organizations, and communities that make sure that chaos and uncertainty is tamed and something better is built. So focusing on and putting our energy and attention towards the ways that we can grow the better systems to share information, to communicate with one another, that gives me hope, that gives me optimism and excitement. And so I think it's really important for us to understand why everyone in the world needs to embark on their own hero's journey to repair our planet and humanity's diseases that causes us to be so divisive, that causes culture wars to proliferate. So we can really learn from what's gone wrong in the past with the advertising industry taking engagement and turning into action to just buy things with consumerism. We can instead learn from those lessons and turn engagement into action to repair ourselves, our communities, and restore the ecosystems that will make us live much healthier lives with a lot more well-being around us. So I think that another big issue that's been causing us to struggle with our storytelling and turning that to the actions that we need is the gamification of media, and how that like social media and likes and all of those different ways of messing with the human brain to cause psychological issues. Those are addictions, insecurities, and things that can be healed together, especially if you focus on reviving the importance of books, eco-literacy, writing, poetry. I think music has been one of the best things in my life to help me get through the most toughest times, because the word resilience means to be able to bounce back. And one of the best ways to bounce back is to embrace curiosity, education, storytelling, and whatever else that really brings you joy and strength. And one of the best ways that we can learn from the world around us is biomimicry. How can we learn from nature in order to restore our media, our storytelling, our content? And one of my favorite humans out there these days is Merlin Sheldrake. And he had a mycorrhizal metaphor that the first global network is the Wood Wide Web created by mycelium. And that really is very similar to the World Wide Web. And so if we focus on the ways that we can share resources, communicate with each other in healthier patterns, we can really grow natural capital alongside human potential. We could follow the network patterns of trees, the roots, brains, lungs, rivers, and arteries that will enable us to empower the leaders that really need to help lead the way. And that includes Indigenous women and youth, especially. We need to proliferate tools that help entangle environment around our media. And metrics will be an important way for us to achieve that, to have a higher value around cultures, languages, imagination, and interconnectedness. Let's bring globality to locality, leveraging engagement to action by centering the bioregional and the biocultural. We have been trashing our minds in our shared home of Earth for a long time, but we can cooperate to clean up the mess because Mother Nature just got home and said, it's time to clean up. So let's have a better time untrashing our home. Thank you all for being here. And I'm excited to grow the future that we all need for each other.
Thanks, Jake. I feel like Mama Nature's been like, I've been here, children. Welcome home. Clean up your mess and let's get on to dinner, hey? Thank you so much for some context setting. I am honored to invite and welcome to share and speak today several panelists that I have great amount of respect for. All of you in this space, I think, have so much to add to the conversation, but I particularly want to recognize a few folks that have jumped in here. Roberta Baskin, lovely to have you with us, an award-winning investigative journalist, among many other things, and now a board member of everything that I seem to work with. She's everywhere. So Roberta, thank you so much. I think Eric's here, Eric Watson from Protozoa Pictures. I can't see the whole screen, but I believe that Eric is here. Paul, my dear friend Paul Redman from If Not Us, Then Who. Thank you, Wave. It's good to have you here with us today. Sanjeev Chatterjee from Media for Change. You want to say hello? And Marcina Hale and Stephen Apkin from many things, Reconsider, but they produce Fabulous Fungi movie as well. So, and many other efforts they've been producing in media for a very long time. Kojo Sankofa, I don't see him on here. Maybe Kojo's on here, but Kojo is a filmmaker and journalist and storyteller. Miss Isa Santana, when you speak about Indigenous and women, I was very clear that I wanted to have my friend Isa here from If Not Us Then Who is a young and Indigenous and female storyteller that's emerging, that I really am excited to have you join us today, Isa. Fran's Blueshift Education, I think she's in here somewhere. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Jake, who you just met, Jake Kelley. Jean-Di Lou is supposed to come. It's very late where he is. Jean Lou is, before he was an eco-restorationist, he was a media, a film creator and a storyteller. So I think John said he might jump in, but it is very late where he is, something like midnight. But he's been doing some incredible work in storytelling around ecology, particularly. John Schull from Ecorestoration Alliance with story maps. Sol, I think, is in here somewhere. Moran Sol Broza with the Be platform. My dear friend Ian Mackenzie from Reculture North Studios, and about a million other things we could point to, Occupy Love and other films. Miguel Rivera, Miguel, I think you're still here. Oh, there's Sol, nice to see you, Sol. I think we're gonna let Miguel go first because he is on his way to another venture, but he has worked so deeply in particularly Hollywood film, Warner Brothers, pretty much every studio you could imagine. So Miguel is here, and then Robin Moore from Rewild, who is their media and comms director. I think I might throw you on the spot here a little bit, Robin, as well. And then Brooke Darshana as well, who's working on campaign-based content for ecosystems. So some of you are media makers, some of you are storytellers, some of you, are behind the camera, in front of the camera, and some of you are amplifying voices and driving change with actions. So oh, it's such a rich conversation. What I would love to do is offer Miguel, because he has to go the floor first. And then I'm just going to call upon the panelists, if you trust my flow and order. And what would be great is just to take a few minutes to make sure to hear from voices. We can always come back around and add some layers. But, if you would tell a little bit about your work and introduce yourself. And then the conversation that I'm hoping we have is talking about some of the challenges to cooperating in common. Oh, there's John. Great. Some of the challenges in particular, one that I think I want to know, because I think cooperation is something we're working towards, but I'm really interested in that tipping point of transforming engagement into action. And what are the challenges from your perspective about transforming, story and engaging people into having that make some sort of actual change in them, in their community, in the way that we behave as a society? That's like a particular challenge point I'm going to ask the panelists to share about. And also, what are the barriers for storytelling to be more transparent and inclusive? How can we decolonize storytelling so that we're actually telling true stories of a global citizenry and not certain predominant stories over and over again? So I'll ask each of you to kind of help me understand some of your challenges. And while you're chatting, because I think you'll probably go there naturally, I would also love to hear some of the strategies. What's working well? What's been effective? What do you see are leverage points? So I'm going to just offer that as a prompt. I'll put it here in the chat as well to remind you, since some of you may come a little bit later. But Miguel, if you're with us, I'm going to let you have a first chance just to light touch introduce yourself, any particular challenges and then opportunities that you're seeing. Thank you so much. And let's see if he made it. And if he didn't, I'm going to go on. He was on the road, so he wasn't sure he'd have reception. Okay, so we'll see if Miguel can make it back, but I'm gonna offer actually this to John Liu, who I know it's very late, and just in case you wanna sneak out, I wanna have you have the opportunity to share. John, if you wanna do just a brief introduction about your work with the hat of your media experience on, and again, I think you heard the prompt, any particular uh, challenges to effective messaging and also inclusive decolonized messaging. And yeah, any solutions, any things you've seen that are hopeful strategies, please go ahead.
Well, yes, I thank you very much. My name's John Liu. I have been a professional observer my entire life. So I worked as a journalist for CBS News as a producer and cameraman. I worked with Radio Televisione Italiana and Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen. All of that took about 17 years. And then I was asked by the World Bank to go to the Lys Plateau in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River and document the restoration of a huge area, the cradle of Chinese civilization. And after I did that, I just compared what I had spent 17 years doing, covering politics and economics and culture. And I believed that, and I still believe that most of what I was doing as a journalist was about Maya, about like an illusion where people were having dominating other people and working for selfish reasons, as opposed to really living fully in life. And I realized that I was somehow looking through time to see that human beings had emerged in paradise and started to trash it. And all the cradles of civilization around the world had gone in the same way. And that if we never realized this and we never went the other in another direction, then we were going to collapse the Earth's ecosystems. And I just changed my life and stopped being a journalist and started studying ecology. So since then, I have been all over the world still. So that didn't change much because I was traveling all the time. But I found that I wanted to work for the good of all and not to work in self-interest and not to try to just understand an illusion, but to understand some fundamental underlying things. And that's been what I've been doing. My feeling, there's tremendous problems to doing this. Reminds me of Woody Allen or something, I did this at a very bad time, something wasn't flowing, there's a cash flow problem or something. But what I realized was that the economy is also false, that we're valuing materialism instead of valuing life. And when we do that, it's easy to destroy the earth. It's probably all that's ever going to happen until we understand that the earth's life support systems are more valuable than anything that human beings have ever made and everything that human beings will ever make. And so coming into that, you realize, well, actually every human being is has the spark of life, has this amazing connection to all energy in the universe. And that I think in this, from this perspective, very philosophically, I would say that we're spiritual beings who are spending a little bit of time as human, understanding what it is to be human, rather than we're human beings who are trying to have find spirituality. So we're going to go to another dimension, but life goes on. And this is more true than selfishness and so on. My recommendations right now, I was dreaming about camps, and then camps came about. Now my recommendations are we should realize that it could get worse before it gets better, and that we need to have central kitchens, creator spaces, and cultural stages, because that might help people to survive a collapse of the existing system, and that we need to redefine what is value, what is valuable, and realize that the air and the water and the biodiversity, the soil fertility, it's all vastly more valuable than anything that human beings have ever made. So, that's been what I have tried to do, and I've tried to realize that we need to be in service as opposed to we need a job. If we all do that, then we're going to live in a more just world, and we're going to be able to react to all the things that need to be done. Well, we have different purposes than the idea that materialism is more valuable than life itself. So, very philosophic. Sorry, I'm terribly exhausted at the moment from too many Zoom.
The philosophical is essential. Again, I actually really appreciate we can't have practical conversations unless we get to the heart of the matter first. And I really deeply respect your wisdom and insight and what you're reminding us. So thank you for sharing. I know it's very late where you are. Feel free also, obviously, the chat is a place we welcome activity. Please feel free to share ideas and thoughts, and if you're hearing things that are interesting to you. And those of you who have bodies of work, please feel free to share your work and links and ways to resource and connect with you in the chat as well. John, if we happen to have you back around, feel free to jump back into the conversation later. And if we don't, then I hope that you get some good rest. You've been with us a lot today. I think I want to go to Isa, my friend Isabel Santana right now, because I think that it feels really important to center the fact that right now I have a lot of devotion to where we can continue to amplify the voices and platform voices, particularly of all the things that I've just defined you as, although you're so much more, Isa. You're a young and indigenous and female storyteller, among other things, and an actress. And I feel like of all the voices in this space, I think yours is probably a representation of the least heard so often. And so I'd really love to hear your perspectives. Just again, like some of the challenges that you're seeing and some of the things you're excited about or that you think are particularly important for us to move towards in storytelling for change. Thank you, Isa. Go ahead.
Hello everyone. It's so nice to be in Brazil and Bahia. In all these spaces, so it's a pleasure for me to be here.
Isa, it's a little muddled. Just want to make sure we get you really clear. Don't know if you have your earbuds in.
Oh, you can listen well? Are you listening well?
That's better.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and it's very nice to see all these faces from many places of the world. I'm pretty sure. and yeah, I want to thank Jamaica also for the invitation. When I think about storytelling, I think about my childhood and all my life, because storytelling for us is a way of life. The way my dad taught me and the way my aunties and all my family, like we teach each other stuff through storytelling. So storytelling is something that for me is natural and it's like my life. and when I think about like challenges, and Jamaica also mentioned that like the least being heard, I think that the main challenge is space for indigenous people to be heard, because we have so many stories to tell, but we are not in the forefront of our stories. So our stories are always being told by others. So I think that a reflection and some questions that I wanted to bring is, it's not only telling Indigenous story, but who are telling these stories, how they are telling these stories, in which way and in which perspective our stories are being told. So I think that this is the main, these questions bring some of the challenges, the ideas of challenges that I see. Because I think that if our stories are not being told, we are not being seen. We are not being seen. Storytelling is a way that we have to humanize ourselves. Right, I'm in Bahia now, northeast of Brazil, not Amazon. It's Atlantic forest. And in the south of Bahia, I am indigenous from the Pataxó Nation, one of the first nations being contact in Brazil. And in the south of Bahia, we are currently living a war. And I think that if I can summarize it, the main reason we are living that war is because we are not seen as people. It's because our lives has less value than the meat industry. And when I think about what we've been going through for more than 500 of years, I think that the main thing that is a challenge for us is that we've never been told Indigenous stories in schools and universities, never been taught to Brazilian population. And I believe that this is the same thing in many countries of the world. We have never been told, like, as people that live in the contemporary world, people always tell the stories of the past, and we don't tell our stories ourselves. Our stories are not being taught in schools or universities. So when we tell our stories, it's a chance for us to be humanized. It's a chance for people to see us as people who have dreams and hopes and stories and families and cultures. So I think that this is the most powerful thing for me about storytelling. It's that it makes us, it shows us the world, how human we are and how complex we are. And if we fill the world with our complexities and with our profound imaginarium, we will have the chance of populating the world we live with more words. And we need more words. We can't live in a single word. In the world we live, we need more and more words. We need more color. We need more cultures. We are going to the what we call the Anthropocene, and I think that the only way for us to change what we are going through is to hear new stories and new perspectives. Because having a mono vision, a single vision, we are seeing with our own eyes, and climate is showing that is not working. So we need more stories. We need more stories to see how we are going to deal with all of this that we're going through as humanity. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Isa. Isa, you should definitely shamelessly plug the new podcast, Impact Storytellers, that we've been helping you co-launch, but really Isa's baby project launching into the world, not only to be a storyteller, but to hold a space, particularly for Indigenous storytellers, to be able to have their stories told and amplified. So Isa, make sure to put that in the chat so people can learn. We're just about to launch it, but I think we have some write-ups about it so that people can learn about it. And then when it launches, I would love everybody's support to help Impact Storytellers be something that circulates through a wider community and that we all get behind. Because if not us and who, and Impact Storytellers are specifically platforms by Indigenous voices. And I would really welcome us all to amplify those voices. So thank you so much, Isa, for sharing.
Thank you. And thanks for reminding about the Impact Storytellers podcast. It's a fruit that we are collecting now from many of the seeds that have been planted all these years. So thank you.
Thank you, Isa. I think I'm gonna, let's see, it's such an interesting conversation. I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. The natural thing would be to come to Paul, but Paul, I'm gonna put you on shelf for just 2 seconds and I'm gonna mix the room up a minute. And I think I'm gonna offer this over to, I think I'd like to ask Sanjeev actually. Sanjeev, it's nice to see you. It's been a minute, but I'd really love to talk about the work that you're doing with Media for Change and sort of the work you're doing to help cultivate storytellers of place and help amplify those voices and network those connections. So Sanjeev, if you want to share a bit, I'd welcome your voice to the center.
Thank you very much, Jamaica. It's so nice to see everyone. My name is Sanjeev Chatterjee. I live in Miami. I teach at the University of Miami. I've taught at the University of Miami for a very long time. My background is in documentary filmmaking, and I teach primarily in the Department of Cinematic Arts, but also because of my documentary background, I teach in journalism as well. So I'm an active documentary filmmaker, and I find this particular forum to be so interesting because my head is in a place really trying to figure out in what ways the documentary storytelling world has changed, let's say, over the last 2 decades. And as I was thinking about it, the filmmaker Jill Godmillo just came out with a book that says, "Kill the Documentary." And what she talks about in the book is that people of my generation and the third quarter of our lives, I think we began by thinking of documentary storytelling and its impact in terms of the impact that the story may have just by the act of telling the story. And I think, as I think about the last 20 years, one couple of things have become clear. One is that no films that we see that actually had an impact or made a change, and be it Blackfish, be it Al Gore's film, the audience did not see the scaffolding that allowed so many people to pick up on the cause to bring it forward. So it was not the creation of an auteur filmmaker that made the impact. So this has become pretty much part and parcel of the contemporary documentary world. If I lay out the scenario, I mean, everybody I think will relate to it. When I came to America in the middle 1980s, there were 3 white gentlemen in blue suits, Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, and Dan Rather, who came into our living rooms and told us about the world and what the world is and what we should think of the world and how we must act on the world, most of it in our living rooms. We continued acting in our living rooms, especially academics like myself. That world has changed, like really transformed. And people like William Uricchio at the Open Doc Lab at MIT are pointing out to us that, look, the fractured media landscape has gotten rid of many things. It has gotten rid of the celebrity culture around people who are in front of the camera, at least not in that scale. We don't relate to movie stars or media stars in that particular way anymore. Maybe social media influencers have more clout in that sense. The second is, as independent storytellers, what is the real change we can hope and what will it take? So the first step, and Media for Change is an organization that I founded. It's not my organization. People make that mistake very often. It's an organization that I founded 10 years ago to basically provide a platform for the young people I was meeting through my travels around the world. People who showed up because they somehow had heard about me or what I was doing, and they wanted to be change makers using media. And I realized that these people, unless they join a mainstream company and then rise through the ranks and become someone in that company, they will not have the means to have a voice. So what does it mean to be an independent person with a voice that they can actually spread through their stories, and what is going to be the purpose of the story? So we started off by saying that, look, Media for Change will help nonprofit organizations with their storytelling needs. We want to basically go ahead and create campaigns that they need, create fundraising videos that they need, create internal and external stories for them. And we have the expertise and we can do that. And through this process, what I realized was that I was aggregating many, many young people around the world who would contribute to this effort. And in the meanwhile, I started having some linkages to people like William Riccio, who've already I've mentioned, but I'm not going to go into the names of people before me and with me who are much more illustrious in what they do. I realized that there are two messages here. The one is that the best thing you can do with your stories is to gather community around your story and around your cause through the storytelling, because you need the community to be powerful to be able to have any impact. So that's one. The second is that I need to stop, maybe it's too late for me, but people need to stop thinking about one medium as the medium for their story, and we need to go beyond that and have a transmedia approach to tell the stories to separate audiences through separate means, through separate media, through separate kinds of storytelling, to be able to create that kind of community that we are talking about. That's beyond borders, that can mimic something or steal something from the mining industry, where you can't find the head of the dragon because it doesn't exist. They can emerge anywhere and move very easily anywhere and recreate themselves. And if there's a strike in one country, next day you see that the headquarters are in another country. This has been pointed out by sociologists and anthropologists who are much more qualified than I am to speak on that subject. But we can probably learn something from that we can create communities that basically take the story further and make the community stronger and bigger. So to this purpose, we are now planning a festival. We're calling it a festival because, first of all, this kind of work needs to be celebrated, and the sense of the festival is also celebratory in that sense. And the festival is not going to be, we'll have a festival in Miami, but before we have the festival in Miami next year, in January, next year in December, in January, there'll be a festival in India, and hopefully there'll be another festival in Ecuador in June. And then, so there's going to be 3 festivals, with the idea that the festival doesn't stop. It goes on and takes place in small, big, medium-sized events around the world that are taken up by people. And we are calling it the With Festival. And the name is With, And you'll hear more about it. We are in the very much in the startup phase of it. I don't know if I can share my screen or not.
You can share screen, Sanjeev, yeah, and then we're also going to try to make sure
I'll
that
take just 1 second. I want to just share one image. If I can find it, of course, in the mess of my images here. So can you see share? So I guess, it's just a bunch of slides that give you a sense of both how we want to be multidisciplinary and we want to be dislocated. And because I come from the University of Miami, I didn't steal it. The designer, I think, stole it from the University of Miami instead of a U, a W as a signifier that we are with each other. So this is what we are working with, and I'm happy to answer questions. Please feel free to write to me. I am going to just put my email in the chat. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Oh, Sanjeev, thank you so much for the work. And I love these sort of mimetic ways that we can keep, I know that Sol has the Be campaign as well, and these mimetic ways that we can sort of signal each other a point of connection. And know that I'm a big champion of the With Festival, so let us know how we can support, and please do put your information in the chat to keep the conversation flowing and make sure we have time for everybody. We'll just take sort of a couple minutes for each share, but I did want to introduce, I think Miguel made it on the line, and I know that he was having some technical issues. So if he's here, I'm gonna take the opportunity, and Miguel, because you missed the opener, I just would love like a brief introduction about your relationship with media and storytelling, but mostly the inquiry is around the sort of challenges and constraints and constructs of the challenges of colonized media, and how do we turn media into engagement? How do we actually, what are the barriers to turning story into something compelling enough to make a change? And then what are some strategies? What are some things working well? What are some hopeful possibilities of ways to sort of leverage that opportunity? So Miguel, if you're with us, I'd love for you to share a little bit. And then after that, I think Kojo, you're here as well, and I might go with you next. Thank you. I think he made it on, right, Miguel? Did he bounce off again? Oh, that's unfortunate. He was here for a second. I'm going to give it 1 second to make sure he's not just trying to unmute.
I am. I'm here. Were you calling me?
Okay, great. Yes, thank you, Miguel. We can hear you. Did you hear the prompt? There you go.
No, I'm sorry. I was.
That's okay, Fran. The prompt was essentially just a brief, short introduction. These are just short shares of context, but an introduction to what your relationship with media is, the work you do. And then the 2 inquiries were around the challenges and constraints and constructs of colonized media, and how do we leverage media for change? What are the barriers in the way? How do we amplify voices? How do we mobilize essentially, and the power of story to affect change? So anything within that context you want to share, I welcome your voice.
Oh, awesome.
I know. And I'm giving you a few minutes. I know you, you've got years.
I'm a smoke jumper. I know how to run it. I know how to jump into fires, raging forest fires. So greetings to everybody, wherever you are on this planet. If you were here this morning, you know that I know that we are everywhere. We're up in the Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, Europe, North, South, Central America, Africa, I think Asia too. So good afternoon, good evening to everybody. And basically what I think Caitlin and Jamaica were talking about is the fact that we need to arrive and not just at a quick commonality, but really figure out, I heard somebody saying stories, tell your stories. Most of us have to get familiar with what happened, right? What happened? And I always go back to the beginning. I'll tell you a few stories about myself so you understand what the dilemma is. Myself as a human being, I never felt like I belonged on this planet ever. I was born in Guatemala. My father was from Guatemala, from mixed Spanish and Maya heritage. My mother was Polish. Her father ran away from the Russians in 1910, I think, before they ran over whatever was Poland at the time, and ended up in New York. So I'm a total mutt. I've never felt like I belonged anywhere on this planet until I was about 27 years old. I got invited to go to an Inipi, Stone People's Lodge ceremony run by a Lakota couple that became my teachers. When my adopted grandmother, before she adopted me, started singing those songs, that was the first time I felt like I belonged on this planet. So everything that we do, everything that I do has to go back to some sort of point of origin so that we can orient to the fact that we are connected to this earth and this to essence of spirit. Creation stories, no matter where you grew up, no matter where you come from, all start the same way. In the beginning, there was nothing. And then out of that nothing, things begin to emerge. So we have to remember our common origin from that essence of spirit. The problem is that all the biographical data that we have accumulated over the centuries has gotten in the way of our connection to spirit. So we have to remove the intermediaries that don't allow us to feel directly connected to spirit, which means we have to question the validity or necessarily how things are seen, how the belief systems are structured, the languages that we use. For instance, English is a noun-based language. Nouns objectify things. And when you objectify a thing around you, you immediately change the nature of the relationship. It creates, it's no longer a living, breathing thing. Water has been objectified. Fire has been objectified. And when you objectify the water, you remove your responsibility to it. So we have to go back to real certain basics and establish what's what so that we know that we all have that in common. So the commonality and has to do with intimacy. And intimacy is a very interesting place because it denotes the fact that you have to have safety, right? And so the media has to be, the media, for instance, language. For us, language has to be re-verified. In other words, people have to understand the validity or the truth in the word and the words that you use. For us, for instance, when you hear the word myth right now, right, everybody assumes that it's a lie, that it's a bad thing. But in reality, when you study the mythologies of the world, of native peoples, that's where all the accumulated knowledge of the centuries is embodied, embedded. And we have to understand what the fundamental relationship to that is, because in mythology, the keys are in for us to how to relate to the land in the way and when we were born. So our bodies are already in resonance with this earth. We just have to cultivate it and don't let any intermediaries get in the way. You know, the Inquisition. I'm sorry, but Rome is still very much, the Roman Empire is still very much alive these days. It just morphed into the Catholic Church. And I can say this with impunity because I was raised a Catholic, so I know what that's like. I'll tell you a short story. When I was in Guatemala growing up, Holy Friday is a big deal, right? But when I was in Friday afternoon, Holy Friday, right, Mass, massive thunderstorm comes in. Thunder and lightning, and I realized, oh, that there's something out there that's a lot more powerful than what's going on here, and this is what we have to do: is remove ourselves and put ourselves in direct connection to the mystery of what this universe is all about. And I think it's important for us to be able to take our agency and not defer it to something or somebody else, but really claim our own. So grassroots movements where you have to learn each other's dances and songs, each other's customs, each other's foods. We got invited to go to Hawaii to run retreats for combat veterans in Maui. And so one of the locals, who was a real dear friend of mine, I said, "What are you guys doing here?" And what he was saying to me is, "Are you another bunch of missionaries from the mainland trying to evangelize us, you know?" And I said, "Nah, we're here to recreate the coming together of the cultures the way it ought to have happened, not the way that it did." Big silence, and he goes, "Cool." The other story that I was talking about this morning, I was listening to some of the presentations, and I realized, for instance, I have friends that work in Guatemala, the northern part of the country, in Petén, which is jungle. And 2 years ago, a bunch of evangelicals, I don't know if I'm going to rattle any feathers here, but a bunch of evangelicals accused one of the medicine men, one of the elders, of being a witch doctor, and they burnt him alive. They went to his house, poured gasoline on him, and set him on fire. Now, these are Christians, mind you, right? And the level of genocide, cultural genocide that's being practiced on the peoples of Guatemala right now is crazy by the evangelicals. I've seen that in Peru. I was in Peru a couple of years ago. All these kids that I met, Pablo, Juan, Pedro, and Mateo, I'm going, what's wrong? And then I realized, oh, these guys have all been given names from the apostles. So the evangelicals are in there, sterilizing the culture. So these are the things that we have to figure out how to deal with, because in that force that's how to change the polemics in the culture. So this is what I think this is what we're asking here, and we have to do it through ritual, ceremony, and through art, right? So hopefully this addresses some of the things that you wanted to Jamaica, but I'm open to. So I'm just doing my best to jump into the fray
Well,
here.
Miguel, what I think is needed, honestly, these storyteller symposiums, I have a lot of passion for convening even just around story, because I think it's one of the most powerful tools of change we have. So along with the WIT Festival, plan on future invitations to storyteller symposiums, because you are a storyteller and there's so much rich to share. And I also want to make sure to have time for some of these incredible voices in the room that we invited to share. So I'm going to do my best to try to time keep and see if we can keep things rich and tight. Miguel, thank you so much for being here. I know how busy you are, and thank you for sharing your truth, because it's so vital. I feel like I want to ask, part of this too, right, is there's context laying of story, and then some of you are leveraging story. But Fran, I'd love to hear a little bit from you, actually, if you would jump in there and just try to keep a couple minutes as we can, but just any context that you want to share and layer in, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Really, really lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation to just share a little bit about the work that I do and why I'm here. And so I think I want to introduce myself. I'm in Denver, Colorado. I am an educator all my life. High school, yes, middle school. I worked in higher education. I worked in the nonprofit sector training teachers, and I've always used the power of documentary storytelling as one of the, if not the most effective ways to move students, to move ideas. I firmly believe that stories advance movements more than any other form of media. And I've seen it and I do it. And the work I do now is really working with all kinds of documentary film stories, primarily documentary, nonfiction. I do some scripted work, creating education impact campaigns. And I know Sanjeev had talked about sort of impact, and that word gets thrown around a lot in storytelling conversation. What does impact? Is it engagement? Is it just eyeballs watching a film? How do you measure impact? What does impact look like? What role does education have in impact? What does community organizing have with impact? So all of this conversation around impact and who creates impact, what are the tools for impact, is very much alive, I think, in documentary filmmaking. And with COVID, there was a real shift in terms of who had access to media. In the education space, there was always sort of a digital divide, always access based, at least in the US context, but also globally. There was a real divide on who had access to information. I think as somebody said earlier in the day, I actually wrote down something that Nathan said, knowledge, access, and equity. And I think about documentary storytelling and storytelling in general as one of the mediums that can actually break down systemic barriers around equity, because people can share stories across boundaries, across borders. And now with different medias, you can certainly do that. And I think the work that I do and why I sort of was introduced to this community is really through the work with Deborah and what's going on with the Institute of Biospherics. And I had seen a documentary film at Sundance, Spaceship Earth, which was about Biosphere 2, and the learning that comes from that, and how students can mine information that inspires and empowers them in their own actions and activities. And so really the work that, I do a lot of climate storytelling. In fact, that's what I was doing today. And I'm working on a project now about the Sunrise Movement and Justice Democrats and what has happened around the Green New Deal, and to tell that story for young people to understand what's at stake in climate education and climate justice. And the work with Deborah, and I know Marcina's on here too. We worked with Fantastic Fungi and did education content for that. And the idea that there is a whole nother arc of a story that can come from a documentary with impact work, because what tools you develop with that story can really make a difference on not only how the film is seen, but how it's used to leverage action, depending on what the goals of the campaign may be. So story, is alive and well, and I think it really does shift worldviews. I really appreciated, Isabel, what you said earlier about the impact. I just watched a film called The Territory that tells about the indigenous communities in Brazil and what's happening around that. And I think it's one of the more powerful documentaries that's out there that's telling the story of indigenous communities and they took the tools of communication in their hands rather than a filmmaker telling their story. They took the cameras in their hands and they told their own story. And it's a very interesting way. And I think a really important juxtaposition of that. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about education. Like, I believe that education is the golden ticket. Like, when we can leverage stories and education together, change happens. I know it, I feel it, I've seen it. And it's figuring out sort of what those tools are. I've heard some amazing thinkers and scholars in these conversations today. And I can almost think of, there's a documentary story that actually can really amplify that. And the capacity of making that go further is so much out there. And the work that we're starting to do with the Institute for Ecotechnics is to actually use some of their documentary archives and to create educational modules that will go out in terms of this somewhat of a transmedia approach, because there's archival, there's film, there's audio, there's all kinds of different stories that are involved. And so that's in its beginning stages as another project. So while my heart is primarily in documentary filmmaking, we leverage storytelling and the work that I do in education formats. I'll put my website in the chat. And I did have a slide that I thought if you could enable me to share. I wanted to, once the teacher, always the teacher. So as I wrap up, what I would love just to see everybody in the chat write a documentary story or film that they have seen that really moved, changed, shifted their perspective on something. And I'd love to see the films that come up, because it would be it can be professional, personal, really doesn't matter. Whatever documentary story, just.
Thank you, Fran. That's so great too, because we saved the chat. So this become a little resource library of some of our favorite.
Good. Oh, good.
Films.
And then I just wanted to share, I had a bunch of quotes that I wanted to share with all of you, but with time, I think I'll just share one. And so let me share my screen real quick here. Can y'all see that? Oh, there's one of my kids in the background.
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, great. And as you're thinking about, I love this summary of what story does. Stories can entertain, sometimes teach or argue a point, but for me, the essential thing is that they communicate feelings, that they appeal to what we share as human beings across our borders and divides. There are large, glamorous industries around stories. It should be the book industry, the movie industry, the television industry, the theater industry. But in the end, stories are about one person saying to another, "This is the way it feels to me. Can you understand what I'm saying? Does it also feel that way to you?"
Yeah, thank you so much, Fran. It's so good. I want more time with you all. So I'm you will be getting more invitations from me, but I will say that part of our hope is you're naming a bridge that I know that I'm particularly keen to help build, and that is between as a story is told, how do we drive it back to action? How do we educate? How do we leverage story? And with each story, have something that you can do in your own community, in your own life, that you can give to another, that you can participate in. I think that we haven't even begun to leverage the real power of having stories coupled with education in that way. I think that that each and every documentary and on film has the opportunity to then say, here's what you can do, because we do compel people, but I don't know that after we've compelled people, we give them something to meaning make with what they've just witnessed or experienced or been moved by. So thank you so much, Fran, for sharing. And please do have your work in the chat. I know we'll be following up about that, but it felt like right because of some of the particular things that you said to actually invite Paul Redman from If Not Us Then Who to jump in and share, because I think there's some things in particular, honoring that we're going to be hosting the filmmakers of territory at the conference on UN Conference on Biodiversity in Montreal in December, and hosting a series of Indigenous focused panels and films, and this is the work that Paul does, and then I get the good fortune to work with Paul on. So Paul, I think it's a good moment for you to jump in and share some of your thoughts, if you would.
Okay, hello, pleased to meet everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Paul Redman, Executive Director of If Not Us, Then Who. And so If Not Us, Then Who, I guess, let's explore what that is. And so If Not Us, Then Who really is an exercise in empowering Indigenous peoples and local communities in story. And so we do that by commissioning, training, partnering with Indigenous filmmakers on the ground and community, by supporting them to tell documentaries mostly, but all sorts of manner of films. So really we can understand what it is to be human. I think that's the real kind of blessing of working with Indigenous peoples, is they maintain that connection to a version of self that's closer to nature, that's closer to living on this earth in a very present moment. And I think film allows us that window into that experience. And I think that's really important now when we're so separate from nature, where industrialization has separated ourselves from, our very natural being. We are nature in our essence, right? And so a large part of what we do is to build story and empower people with story. And I think what's really exciting about that is when you see an Indigenous person or Indigenous young person who's been obsessed with maybe going to the city and living in modernity, suddenly point a camera, so you say to them, take this camera, point it at the elders in your community and understand what it is to be you. Then all of a sudden there's an ownership of that story and a heroism that comes from the elders in their community. And so you build cultures of resistance, cultures of people who are connected to land and will protect that land and honor that land. And I think that's really what we need in this transition away from our industrial age to something that's more honoring and respectful to the earth, are lots and lots of stories, cultural resilience in territory. So those territories can be protected. And I think Indigenous peoples really are, the people on this earth who are still living that reality and are facing the most extreme threats for, that reality. And so, yeah, a large part of what we do is empowering and supporting storytellers to tell that story. And I guess thinking about Sanjeev's transmedia suggestion and thoughts, and, I think that's really where we love to come from as well. We're in a space where we need to explore different experiences to get across this message. And so we do a lot of events where we bring people together, which are stories in themselves, right? A cast of people on a stage talking to each other on panels, some video, some music, some art, right? And all of that gets people on the feeling plane to understand, where we're coming from and where Indigenous peoples are coming from in terms of, being part of nature and being part of a climate solution. And so, yeah, and I guess I come at this story as a documentary filmmaker and as somebody who is English, born in South Africa, lived back in England, moved to America, so kind of lost, a nomad, right? And so I come at this story with a quest to understand what it means to belong. And I think that's really key, what was said earlier on. I think that's where, Indigenous wisdom and ancestral wisdom is really going to help us to connect and find a true path forward. On this planet. I think it's a really exciting space to explore new story and to find new stories. And I really think also when it comes to action, I think the action is the story, right? In many ways, it's inventing a story of self that we feel inspired by, that we feel that we want to connect to. That's not this hideous industrial extractive colonialist way of telling stories, but it's a participatory, it's a sharing, it's a lots of ecosystems of different cultures. I think the telling of story is as much an action as the call to action at the end of the story. That's kind of, I guess, where I come from at If Not Us, Then Who, and where we come from as a collective of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous storytellers and creators.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, it's a real honor to get to work with you. And on that, it felt right. We have David Hernandez here from If Not Us, Then Who, an Indigenous storyteller. And it feels right, David, if you're here, for you to share some thoughts. Just briefly introduce yourself. We're just taking a few minutes each because we still have a few people to get through. But I'd love to hear your thoughts after you've heard Paul speak. Thank you, David, for being here. Kierda. You're on mute, friend. Let's unmute.
There you go. I'm here. Thanks, Jamaica, for inviting me. I was trying just to, make some space here. So yeah, I think my name is David Hernandez Palmara. I'm from the Guayu peoples. We are in both countries, Colombia and Venezuela, in South America. And for me, it makes a lot of sense to, first of all, recognize that we need to work more in the humility that, storytelling can offer as lessons and blessings, and the power that opportunities can offer to, to put in practice the right we have to talk to other people, to talk to ourselves, to talk to each other on what has been done in terms of representation. And the work we do at Unaras and Who, I'm part of the organization that Paul just mentioned. I run a mentorship there. We can also have another reference. We can, resemanticize. We can rethink and unthink what has been told about us. And that's where outer representation or self-representation comes in. And I think that has a lot of meaning for me and for the communities that I work with, because for a lot of years we've been told that we are not only not worth of being portrayed in a worthy way or in a way with dignity, but if we were up here in the screen, we'll be just savages or just a good Indian that is the good one just because he's just the right person who can offer the life for the other person with nothing reciprocity. So I'm just saying this because I'm coming from the past 2 years watching a lot of movies, a lot of short films, a lot of of truth reconciliations with elders through storytelling, how Indigenous imaginary has been a key process for us to not only heal, but also to break down how trauma can be recognized as a system. And that can be sought out through storytelling, through documentary, through recognizing that also we can learn lessons from other nations, other indigenous nations, and what we can, put out there for our peoples. And not only in terms of values, but also in terms of how people can sustain their lives. How come my people, we are from the wilderness, we have the tropical dry forest where I live. How we can relate to people from the Navajo nations or, in Africa that, can have the same situation in terms of drought, and how it is affected or is worsened because of the climate change. So all these messages, not only we can relate because of the problem, but we can relate because we have solutions. And that's how I want to just, conclude my idea, is that, for every story we learn, the more we confirm that we are having solutions to the problems that we were, told that we're part of. We can discuss about that, but for sure we can, expand the information that we are living solutions to it, and that we deserve just not to be part of the big conversation, but also to be leaders in that conversation. Yeah.
David, shamelessly plug the work that you do and the films that you make. Maybe Paul can do that on your behalf because you're on your phone, but it'd really wonderfully be in the chat to have people get to see your films that you've made and know about the mentor program. And I feel like I want to call on Eric next. Again, we're just going to have to take a few minutes now. I'm sure there's so much that each of you are waiting to say, but I still want to have at least the main voices heard that we invited into the space. But Eric, if you'd like to share a bit about your work, I'd like to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a real pleasure to hear the different perspectives on story. At Protozoa, we're really trying to leverage our position in the film industry and beyond to take some of the stories to wider audiences that might not access some of the material or some of the topics and themes that we're talking about here. And so I mean, promoting the territory, using National Geographic and Disney to promote the territory has been a really big campaign for us this year, because we want to show people what's actually happening in the Amazon, and not, it gets abstract, but that movie in my mind, does a really good job of showing what's happening on the ground and understanding the context of why this is important. And we're doing our best to bring that to as many people as possible. It's also why we've made a series with Will Smith, One Strange Rock and Welcome to Earth, and we're doing what we call Pull to Pull now. And Will was just in Ecuador with the Waorani people for 2 weeks. And the point of that is to reach audiences that don't otherwise have access to, or aren't inclined to watch a documentary, or inclined to learn about the planet or how beautiful it is or why it's worth saving even. And so we're always looking for how we can bring stories from voices that maybe don't have the same, access to that level of marketing or distribution to a wider audience. And one of the projects we're working on right now is about this man named Sidney Pozuelo, who, among other things, created the Javari Preserve in Acre, Brazil, which is one of the largest preserves in the world, where there's several uncontacted tribes, and we're also working very hard to protect that area. And so I think, we all understand that if you can bring an issue to the forefront into people's consciousness, then the possibility of protecting a piece of land or people through that awareness is really, really important. And so I just want to kind of reference that perspective of like, how do we reach people? How do we touch them in their hearts? How do we get them to move? How do we get them to take action? And how do we use the positions that we have to bring concepts to a wider audience? And so, for instance, I think that John Liu is somebody who's done that for me in terms of regenerative agriculture. Like, I would not have had any sense of the power of that topic had I not seen the documentary work that he's done. So just really appreciating that. Thank you.
So much. Yeah, thank you for your incredible work. Again, please share some links in the chat. I know you've got a bunch of films that you've worked on and are actively working on. So grateful for your voice in this space. And I wonder, Kojo, are you with us still? I just want to make sure if you're here. I wanted to give you a chance to share. I called on you earlier, but I wasn't sure if I saw you.
Yes, greetings. I'm on here. How's everyone doing?
Really good, thanks. If you just have a few minutes of something you want to offer to the space, we look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, I'm kind of out and it's a bit loud, so maybe give me a few minutes. If you all have a few minutes to get inside, then I can share some thoughts.
Yeah, Kojo, why don't you head in, and I'll actually ask Roberta to jump in next, but why don't you come on back and we'll get you in the mix too. Thanks, we'll take just a second.
Sounds good.
Roberta, do you want to share some thoughts?
Yeah, I'm on the edge of my seat listening to the conversation and really appreciating all of you and the work that you're doing globally. By way of introduction, I'm a recovering investigative reporter who worked for more than 30 years with ABC, CBS, with Bill Moyers, and also in local news. And on a good day, I felt like I could change the world. Not enough good days. And I then moved into running the Center for Public Integrity. And I had a kind of epiphany in, I would say that most of my work, if I had a beat, it was corporate misconduct. I couldn't wait to tell you about a company doing a bad thing, and traveled the world revealing corporate misconduct. And at some point, Sanjeev was along for this ride in a funny way, which is I was involved in an organization called Images and Voices of Hope. And I took a class actually twice because I have such a problem-oriented brain that I wanted to shift and do a 180 into, well, what about solutions? Instead of telling people about all the problems in the world, what if instead I look for what's working and who's doing it right? And I started a program called Aim to Flourish, which was taking the Sustainable Development Goals, and even before the UN voted on them, and just saying that this is what, this is really what needs to happen urgently in the world, with a particular love for Goal 13 climate action. But feeling like all of them are, I mean, it's all interconnected. Anyway, started putting them out there with a curriculum to business school students all around the world in more than 100 countries, and teaching them about the SDGs and asking them to find a business that in some way was helping to achieve one or more of the goals. And at this point, we have more than 4,000 stories on our platform, Aim to Flourish with a number 2, that are written by business school students. And for them, it's an experience of finding somebody that they admire who is in a for-profit company, but doing good and doing well. And these stories we celebrate the 17 best each year. Anyway, I'm really proud of that shift in my brain to think, instead of all the problems in the world, which can leave people just feeling like, what am I supposed to do about that? To instead going on this discovery of what works and who's doing it right. I've also been very focused on the climate crisis, and I'm on the board of One Earth, and we give out grants for really very grassroots efforts in indigenous areas, a lot focused on women with our Daughters for Earth program. And that's been a lot of experiential learning for me. I am passionate about storytelling as a way to get stuff done. I am a little freaked out about America right these days, and have been working with a lot of Get Out the Vote youth groups, including putting together videos for them for social media, just to try to, get more voices to the polls, especially young voices, because I really do feel that it's their future that my generation has messed up. And I am also involved in a group that I love called, I'm on the board of something called, which went from Images and Voices of Hope to the Peace Studio. And the Peace Studio is about supporting media makers. Also, we have fellowships. We give $10,000 for projects to our fellows. And we're really working on all kinds of media making. It's not just, my obsession has been journalism and documentary filmmaking, but this is about storytelling of all kinds: music, art, documentaries, dance, just what people do in terms of storytelling. And I'm really excited about how this is growing and evolving. I have a David Orr, who I admire, professor at Oberlin, came up with a quote that I love, that is how I think about approaching my day, which is, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And so I roll up my sleeves every day, and I'm not pulling the covers over my head about all of the ugliness in the world right now, but really believing, or rather knowing, that there's more goodness, there's more good, and that we are at this pivotal moment, and we do have choices. And I believe in the power of storytelling to really make that shift, the shift that we all want. So I'll leave it there because it's late.
Late. Yeah. Thank you so much, Roberta, for your legacy of work and sharing it here with us. I know that there's several people who have to go, and that we still have some voice here, and just want to apologize. There's doing our best to facilitate so much, and acknowledging when we run to the end that that's on me as a facilitator to try to always improve and do better. But I did want to say we're going to let this session run 5 over. So for those of you who are joining for the next session, you can linger on to the tail here. And I did want to see, Kojo, if you had a few minutes to share, and then we were going to go Ian and Marcina, if you can stick around just a few more minutes, and then we'll Katie's going to take the floor from there and help with any final voices, Soul, and some other people as well. But yeah, as much as we can, share in the chat as well. But Kojo, if you'd like to share a bit here, we will do our best to get a couple more voices in before we round today and take another extra 5 minutes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Kojo Jana Pintin. I'm a journalist and filmmaker. I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa, and I've been making films and telling stories for the past 20 years, and mostly films about the environment and the climate and so forth. I had a film that won the best international film at the International Nature Film Festival in Budapest, Hungary, in 2018. So that's been my journey, and we're still making films, working on some projects, mostly feature, drama series, and stuff like that. And I'm happy to share my thoughts on the climate in Ghana. I'm also a farmer, naturally, as it should be. So I have a farm in Ghana and working with an organization that we set up OG6 to farm pineapples and also some other crops like cocoa. So
Thank you so
nice
much.
meeting everyone.
Yeah, really great to have you with us today. And please do share some of the links to your work in the chat. I think we said Ian and then Marcina. See if we can sneak him in before they have to run off as well. But Ian Mackenzie, a dear friend of mine, please go ahead and feel free
Absolutely,
to share.
I'll do just that.
Thank you, Kojo.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jamaica. And thanks everyone here for such a cauldron of good work being done in the world and media and education and impact. Just a couple bits about me. I mean, yeah, I've been mostly a documentary filmmaker the last 15 years. I worked on a film called Occupy Love with the Canadian director Velcro Ripper, and really just tracked like the emergence of culture and all these different threads around the world and tried to amplify it in all of the ways that sounds like so many of you are also doing as well. Most recently, I've been doing a documentary about a film or about a community in Portugal called Tamera, which is, some of you might have known of them by now. They've essentially been trying to model essentially a peace culture, largely through European lineage, sort of revillaging, which has been so much of the sort of undercurrent, I think, of what we're, I think, trying to do. And that's, of course, where Jamaica and I have connected with re-inhabiting the village and, you know, all of those threads there. And so, yeah, I just wanted to hold that up and say that's a main offering that we'll be releasing initially in December, then later in the spring, as sort of a mimetic pollination of what does it take to actually regenerate a culture of trust, alongside, of course, all these other amazing projects in the world, as well as a school that I co-founded earlier this year. We've talked about myth, we've talked about story, and the school is called the School of Mythopoetics, which is really about that, bringing together the fertile soil of mythology, ritual practice, together with lots of credible teachers. So I just wanted to drop that in the chat if any folks are interested in checking that stuff out. And all my films as well are on my website, which I'll put on there. But yeah, already lots of great cross-pollinations. I'll probably be reaching out to a number of you after this, just to connect and see where things might want to emerge. So thanks everybody for all of your time and your good work.
Thank you, Ian. And I'm going to make a link between Isabel and Ian. Isabel is a recent new story podcaster, and Ian's been teaching a masterclass on podcasts because he has an incredible following on Spotify with his podcast as well. So these are the kind of bridges that I'm really excited to keep building together. Ian, thank you for sharing. I'm sorry it was condensed. Your work is so much more vast than that. Jump in, and Marcina as well. I know that you have to go. I'd love to have you share a bit about the work that you've done with Fantastic Fungi and Reconsider and all the other incredible efforts you've made.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna actually jump off. Stephen is on. He's not on the camera because he's actually driving out to do a shoot out in Indiana. But I think he's on the phone, so he'll stay on for about a little bit later. But you know, one of the things I just want to say is that, you know, with the way that we actually came out with Fantastic Fungi was in a non-traditional way. I think it's really important that films don't get caught in trying to be coming out in a traditional way, but actually more working with community and building community bases with whatever projects, and really linking up with the organizations that they represent or that they inspire, and the importance of being able to work with these different organizations to both help work as mycelium to drive different changes, but also to have them kind of own the films as their own, as a part of what there is their voice as well. So, and I'm going to leave it to Stephen. It was great to be on this call and to listen to everybody. Steve, you there?
I am here. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thanks so much, Jamaica. And I really appreciate this story that's being woven with all of the speakers today. There's a larger story that's being created, and I really appreciate it. I've spent the last several decades thinking deeply about storytelling, and started over 20 years ago a film and education center that was focused on the power of storytelling. And we would show 450 different films a year from 50 different countries, many, many documentaries around social justice and environmental issues, human rights, etc. And I think that there's a couple of things that I'd love to share about that. The first is the responsibility, and I started making films as well during that time, and also wrote a book called The Age of the Image, which is looking at the power of visual storytelling and why it's so powerful for us. But I think that there's a fundamental responsibility that we need to think about, which is that all media, in a way, is manipulated. If you were to look at any of our films and look at the nonlinear editing tracks, you would see the manipulation that goes on of voices under images that aren't directly tied to it, the ways in which meaning from one image and meaning from a second image juxtaposed and put together create a third meaning. And so thinking about that responsibility, starting with the stories we choose to tell and who's telling them, and then how we tell them. This came to very poignantly to me when we were screening a film, and I won't name the film, but it was a film about hunger and poverty in America. And I watched the film in preparation of a conversation and watched it with 300 people, and we all felt the same emotional response as the film was going through. But as I was sitting and having the conversation with an audience, all of a sudden fear struck, because I realized the ways in which we often revert to conventional storytelling is to reinforce the tropes of who the hero is and who the victim is, who the villain, who is the perpetrator, and who is the victim. And so we have to be very careful about the ways in which we tell these stories to not reinforce those traditional ideas, but to look deeper. And then the last thing I would say is that as a documentary filmmaker, the question of truth is always a really interesting one. And I think that what becomes most important to me in storytelling is rather than telling who did what to who and the sequence of how things happen, is actually to create a felt experience so that it resonates with the people who are watching it. And rather than calling out the specific things that somebody can do, is to trust the audience. And when you create that felt experience, is to trust that they'll take whatever that is and incorporate it into their own lives, because every story we tell ultimately resonates or should resonate in a universal way and be relevant to each person in the audience in the ways in which they consume it. And thank you very much, Tamika.
Thank you so much, Steve. I believe we just have Sol. Sol, are you still on? Would you like to share briefly?
Okay, just a second. I have been prepared on a laptop, but at the last minute, I'm not anymore. Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I know we're up for time, so I'll just make it quick. I'm really touched and moved by a lot of the work everyone is doing. In reference to the title of this session, I guess my relevance here is how we can unite as many voices as possible and the current age of social media to create awareness at a critical mass level. I come from a background from the music industry and entertainment industry. And my kind of whole systems thinking approach brought me to think of the impact of music and visual entertainment on a global level. And for example, I take inspiration from We Are the World, where multiple influential voices were united, and the power of one song from, I believe it's at least close to 30 years ago, plus or minus, is still reverberating to this day. And because of our global challenge that, this mission we all have to, are setting out on and needing as many hands on deck as possible, I'm co-orchestrating with many others, some on this call as we speak, to call together the influencer in each of us to unite something along the lines of a thunderclap campaign to go viral now using potentially TikTok and hashtags and get international, intergenerational voices united. And then rather than just leave it at inspiration, actually direct people to a platform where we can remain connected and help people find actions they can take either on governmental levels, corporations, and or civil society. And that's where Open Impact, I think, is providing a beautiful tool at that stage of development where we can just hopefully funnel everyone to this one place, which is building a home with not only is it the technology and software that can provide connectivity, but also earlier today or yesterday, I can't remember, someone mentioned vetting for one another. And I think this room right here is an example of that, and seeing the connections of people who've been invited to be here, to speak here, the work they're doing, and what is the power of all of us doing it together. That's actually pretty much the title of the campaign, to invite everyone to be together. And the song is called Together. So that's the most I'll say, I think, at the moment. Thank you again for the honor. Hats off to you guys for putting this 3-day event together. And I look forward to meeting and working with everyone in future. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Sol. Thanks for bringing us in so well. Thank you for your patience for those who just trickled in for the next session. We're just wrapping the session on media here, but you're in the right place. Something happened in the chat while we were all talking that felt like a relevant remark to close this one out. Earlier, someone prompted us to put documentaries that had influenced our lives into the chat, and I'd put Baraka. And Miguel, who was in this room, messaged me and said, well, I worked on that. And I found myself thinking, well, gosh, we might not be an Open Future Forum if it weren't for Baraka and Miguel having worked on that. And I thought that was just such a wonderful moment of connection and the ripple effects of each and every one of our actions and the way that we've impacted one another who are here in ways that we might not have ever realized it. So thank you to each and every one of you for all of your little actions. As Sol mentioned too, we're really pleased to be starting to partner with media and campaigns to start driving attention and the exceptional power of storytelling towards opportunities for direct action and ecological restoration and even participatory storytelling and citizen science. So look forward to continuing to explore that with many of you here. Thank you so much for your time and for your generosity in sharing. And that's a wrap on this session. There's another session that's happening right now in another room that I'm going to share in the chat again right here on restoring planetary reciprocity and rights of nature. And so you're welcome to hop to that one if you'd like to join there. And here we'll be having a conversation on designing technology through a living systems lens. And so right here is the chat, or the link to that other session, and then welcome to those who would like to participate in that next session. I'm just going to stop the recording